like it's a graduation, and I'm like, class, please have a seat. How are you all doing? Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be here. Thank you for the masks. Sorry for the masks. As we all know, Global Citizen has 3 main goals: defeating poverty, defending the planet, demanding equity. But we are going to address this all now with the urgency of now, of what's happening in the moment. And we're going to do it Morning Joe style. Madam President, Morning Joe is a very fast-paced conversation that we have every morning on television, and there's a lot of interrupting. So feel free to take over anytime you want, Hugh, Chuck. But often we find ourselves at times of crisis, beginning with the pandemic and now with the war in Ukraine. And crisis can take things into a new direction. It can realign relationships, create new ones, reshape the landscape, and change the way we approach problems. And that's where we will begin with the urgency of now. Madam President, I'll start with you. From food insecurity to fuel dependence to millions of people displaced, and that's just to name a few of the problems we're facing right now. What are you most concerned about looking ahead maybe to the next 3 to 6 months for Europe and the world?
Yes, first of all, thank you very much for having me here. It's wonderful to be here and to be at this summit. Indeed, there is a multitude of crises we are facing now, and if you ask me to look at the most pressing ones, well, of course, the most pressing ones are, I'd say, 3. That is the war in Ukraine, the unjustified aggression of Russia against Ukraine. So we have to do everything to make sure that this country, that Ukraine is withstanding, and that it is making it, and that this war is a strategic failure for Putin. That's point number 1. The second crisis is, of course, climate change. This is the big looming crisis in the background. And we have to do everything to transform into clean energies. This is linked also to the Ukraine crisis and to Russia's fossil fuel blackmailing against the European Union. And the third one, which is really worrying me, is the upcoming food crisis, which I see. And we have to do everything to get the grain out of Ukraine that is there, and of course to make sure that there is a fair distribution of the worldwide grain also to the vulnerable countries. So a lot is on my mind, but these are my 3 most urgent concerns.
The food crisis is potentially a real strategic concern focused on one area of Ukraine, of making sure we can have access. Before we open it up, I'm just interested, you made a remarkable trip to Kyiv, meeting President Zelensky. Were you inspired, perhaps even motivated by the determination of the Ukrainian people?
Oh, yes. I mean, I was in Bucha, and I saw with my own eyes the body bags on the ground. I saw the mass graves. It's horrible. There are no words to describe it. I saw the houses, the hospitals, the kindergartens hit by Russian bombs and shelling, and really like wounds or scars in the landscape. But what I also must say, I was so impressed by the bravery and the hope that the Ukrainian people have for their future. This is amazing. We can never match their sacrifice, but we can do everything to support them, and we have to do everything to support them. And after my talks with President Zelensky, I mean, his outstanding leadership, this should be motivation for all of us really to support this brave country.
Absolutely, and that's where... Couldn't agree more. That's where Global Citizen and companies like Cisco step up. Chuck Robbins, Cisco pivoted right away and made a decision pretty much immediately to stop all business in Russia and Belarus. Can you take us inside the decision, in-house, inside Cisco? How did that complicate your operation, or was it an easy decision to make?
Well, first of all, thanks for having me here, and Hugh, congratulations on everything that you guys continue to do. Just it's inspirational to all of us as well, so thank you. you know, from where I sit, the decision was easy. I'm sure it was much more complicated for my team that had to implement it. But there was not much of a decision to be made. I think, you know, if you just step back and looked at the legality of it relative to the different sanctions that we had to abide with. We had the European sanctions, we had the UK sanctions, and we had the US sanctions. And when you do the Venn diagram on that, it basically says shut your operations down. But we would have made that call anyway. And but the other things that we did is we wanted to also take care of our Russian employees, because most of them were not supportive of what was happening. And so when we ceased operations, we actually gave them subsidies, income subsidies, and sent them home for some period of time. We have continued to help them in various ways financially. Some of them have made the decision to leave the country, and then we've supported them once they've exited. And then at the same time, we have been very active. Before the invasion, we had offered to financially cover cost of getting our employees out of Ukraine if they wanted to get out. Subsequently, we've been sending lots of equipment and networking gear in for communication, teams setting up wireless access in refugee camps and all sorts of good stuff. So we have a great team. And to be honest, in a lot of these situations, they come tell me what we're going to do, and because they just know that's what we're going to do.
They know what you're going to want. Hugh, global citizen, pivoted again. There's been a lot of pivoting lately, a lot of global crises. And this time for the war in Ukraine. I know you were in Warsaw, where you had some time with my brother, the ambassador to Poland, Mika Brzezinski, U.S. ambassador to Poland. And you were there for Stand Up for Ukraine, the campaign, which is amazing. Were you, just curious at all, motivated by, inspired by the global response to the refugee crisis that you were able to see with your own eyes at the border?
Absolutely, and I should start by saying that your brother, Mika Brzezinski, is an absolute legend. We spent time with him at the embassy, and his leadership across Poland is truly extraordinary right now. And there was one thing that stuck with me when we went, and some of my colleagues who are here today, Fran Katsoudas, we went to the border of Poland and Ukraine, and there was this one image that I'll never forget of this young mother crossing the border from Ukraine into Poland, almost having to drag the baby bassinet that she was carrying because it was too heavy across the border and onto an unmarked bus. And I just sat there, and I don't consider myself an overly emotional man, but I cried the whole time. And I thought to myself, we have to do everything we can to help make sure that mother gets onto the bus, to get somewhere safe and warm, and has the medical attention to support her and her child if needed. And so that's why our whole global citizen team immediately launched Stand Up for Ukraine. We partnered with everyone that we could, and we asked all of the artist community to get involved. We had U2 and Bono really took the reins together with Billie Eilish, and then Bruce Springsteen jumped on board, and then all of a sudden the whole artist community mobilized. And this came to a head a month ago, actually, where President von der Leyen and Prime Minister Trudeau of Canada, and also with, President Zelensky of Ukraine, came together for Stand Up for Ukraine. And that campaign ultimately raised $10.1 billion for refugee relief, which has been immediately deployed for people across the region. But I think that that President von der Leyen made a really important point, and this is something I hope all of us in this room will internalize, that the next crisis of food security is coming. And if we care about the mission of helping the most vulnerable people on our planet, the fact is that people across the Middle East and parts of sub-Saharan Africa soon will not have enough grain, not just to support their own food security, but for their agricultural food security. And so this is a huge looming challenge as Russia continues to bomb warehouses and block wheat from leaving ports. We have to jump onto this right away.
Yeah, and can you imagine how tight the timing has been for all this that has happened, including the mobilization? My brother kind of describes this as this sort of rolling miracle that he is bearing witness to at the border, especially in Poland, where the United States and the Polish government, the country, the world, local communities organically and systematically and so rapidly stepped up, taking in, I don't know, up to 4 million refugees in 3 months. By the way, would this happen in America? And by the way, they have baby formula, a lot of it. And so I just wonder, Hugh, Madam President, what are the learning opportunities on how to effectively mobilize on a grand scale so quickly?
Well, I think that as an organization, and I'll pass to Madam President in a few seconds, I think what we've learned as an organization is because the world is facing a confluence of crises all at once, you have to be incredibly disciplined because you could take on a new crisis every single week.
Yeah.
And we have a mission, and our mission is to eradicate extreme poverty within our lifetime. And we look at it through that lens very carefully, and it's a judgment call. It's often incredibly hard to make that judgment call. But to give you one example, I remember when COVID-19 first struck, to be really honest, I was a bit despondent. I was like, okay, where's Global Citizen possibly going to do from here? And I remember our board came together and they all looked me in the eye and they said, Hugh, pull yourself together. Literally, I remember Fran said that. And
thank you, Fran.
And they said, and focus on where you can be of greater service to those in need. And the next day I got a call from Dr. Tedros, the head of the World Health Organization, who asked us if we could mobilize the artist community, and the next day, One World Together at Home was born, and then when Lady Gaga brought it all around the world with the Rolling Stones, that's actually what enabled President von der Leyen and I to first meet, because it was broadcast into over 300 countries around the world, and 300 homes around the world, and ultimately raised $127.9 million in one night for PPE. And that's when together we launched a fundraising effort the following month to raise urgent money for vaccine relief. But I think what this highlights is, one, be of service quickly, but bridge partnerships between, we're an NGO. We mobilize young people all around the world. Chuck's the CEO of a huge, huge organization. President von der Leyen oversees all of the European Commission.
Right.
We have to build bridges and work together super quickly. Madam President?
I can only compliment that. First of all, what we see with the Ukrainian refugees is, of course, fantastic people in Poland, in Hungary, in Slovakia, in Romania, all over the European Union and even further on, who open their hearts, their minds, and their homes. This is the first thing, and we should always really applaud the people who do that. And then, indeed, there's a responsibility for us, each one of us in our place. And what we should ask us, what can I do? This famous Kennedy speaking, don't ask what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country. This, in a wider sense, is there too. And then was for me a fantastic experience to join forces with you, because indeed here is European politics, the 27 member states, but there's the artist community, here's the global citizen, and if we join forces, we are so strong. We can achieve so much if we have the business sector, the corporate responsibility on our side. We are so strong, and that should be our motto for crises that are upcoming or that are there. Together, we can really overcome the crisis.
And many of the European nations, what fuels the passion here, and the urgency of now, is the shared history. We have been down this road before. We cannot believe that this is happening again, and we will not have it. That is what the Polish people are definitely saying as they look into the eyes of Ukrainians when they traipse across the border, broken families, broken hearts, and that helps. But for the private sector, Chuck, what drives and what more can be done to compel the private sector to step up? Cisco not only stepped up for Russians who worked for the company or Ukrainians who wanted to leave, but also for the Ukrainian people, setting up Ukrainian Humanitarian Assistance Fund. But where does that come from when there isn't that sort of foundational shared passion and history?
Well, what I would tell you is that most CEOs in the United States in particular, that I know very well, feel the same way that I do about these issues. And the great thing about what you both were just describing is we give them a framework to plug into. And I think, much like you rally the musical and the arts community. President rallies the political and governments, and we try to rally the business community, and when we bring all those together, I think that's that power that you were speaking of. And I just think we have to, it's incumbent upon the business community to do a better job of roping in our peers. And we've been trying, and we've had some level of success. During the pandemic, we led, and we had conference call after conference call, raising money, buying PPE, doing all those kinds of things, and we would pull every company together, and we might be able to give $20 million, and someone else can only give $100,000, but it's like any time you're talking about charity, every bit helps, right? And so I think we just have to continue to create frameworks that they can plug into.
But a company has to have a moral compass to want to do these things, and it sounds like everybody is in sync at Cisco. They knew without having to ask.
That's for sure.
Which is nice.
They don't ask much.
Is that good? Yeah, I think that's good. Madam President, your thoughts on mobilizing the private sector, but also the complicated geostrategic landscape, if I could. What lessons can we take, you take, from the Russian invasion in terms of energy independence and the search for alternative forms of fuel that would ultimately be aligned with global citizens' #1 goal of defending the planet? Because right now we find ourselves, we, the collective United States and Europe, find ourselves in a bind.
Yes, indeed, if you look at Russia's way to wage war, it's also weaponizing energy. And indeed, the European Union is heavily depending on Russian fossil fuels, oil, gas, and coal. And we experienced over the last weeks and months the pressure that Russia tried to put on us and the way it tried to blackmail us. You might have read that they cut off Finland now of supply of gas, also Bulgaria, also Poland. But the good part in a very, very bitter story is that because we experienced that, we're even accelerating the move forward, weaning out of fossil fuels and going into the renewables as a clean and independent energy with jobs growing at home. And therefore, right now, there's a strong determination in the European Union to get rid of the dependency of Russian fossil fuels, but overall fossil fuels. And this is something very, very strange. I mean, Putin would have never, ever thought that he is accelerating the green transition, the European Green Deal, towards a zero-emission economy. And there are basically three things. First of all, it's all of us, the consumer, save energy. You can do so much by saving energy. Just if we speak, for example, of air conditioning or heating, 1 degree more or less air conditioning or heating, it's 10 billion cubic meters saved per year in the European Union, for example. It's energy, saving energy. The second one is, of course, that we diversify away from Russia to reliable suppliers, like our friends in the United States. But the most important is massive investment in renewables, in wind and solar, in hydropower, in hydrogen. And this is also not only good news for us if we move into the renewable energy, but it's also extremely good news for the global south. Because it's there where in abundance these resources are. It's there where the future sits for renewable energy to be exported, for example, to the European Union or to the United States. So it's also something where we heavily now invest in, for example, with our friends on the African country, to really build the infrastructure for hydrogen that one day will be the energy of the future.
But how far off is that? Because for some countries, it's years away, and we are in the urgency of now with this war. And holding back from sanctioning Russia, the EU, on fuel sort of drives makes it the situation worse, does it not? Should we not fully be surrounding him with the worst sanctions possible?
Absolutely, absolutely. Therefore, we completely cut off now our imports of Russian coal.
Okay.
We're weaning down the Russian oil. And interesting, in the gas sector, let me give you two figures that show already a trend. Last year, we imported 40% of our needs in gas from Russia. In April this year, we were down to 26% already, so almost cut in half. And we move on that. And in parallel, of course, we have to move forward with the renewable energies. This is our famous European Green Deal. I was a few days ago in Denmark, where 4 member states are forming an alliance for offshore wind. They are now planning together, deploying the offshore wind together, and they plan on having in 2030 heating and serving 50 million homes only with offshore wind. So it's a transformation that is going on. It was already quite ambitious, but with the blackmail from Russia, it's now being accelerated, and that's the development we want.
And it is blackmail, so at this point, Vladimir Putin is responsible for reinvigorating and growing in size NATO, bringing great strength and determination and unity to the European Union. And Hugh is helping you get closer to one of your 3 goals of defending the planet. Who would have thought?
Absolutely. It's the great irony. And I think that, for citizens around the world that are asking themselves right now, what can you do to defend the planet? I think Chuck was selling himself short before when he said that Cisco was willing to do whatever. They've been at the forefront, say, as part of corporate push for the race to zero. They were one of the first Fortune 100 companies to commit to net zero carbon emissions by 2030 and 2050, in line with the Science-Based Target Initiative. We need all of corporate America and the European Roundtable to commit to do the same, because ultimately, and we know that the private sector makes up 80% of the world's carbon emissions. If we're truly serious about cutting back, we need the private sector to lead. And so I commend you, Chuck, and I agree with what you said earlier about pushing other CEOs gently, or sometimes not so gently, to head in that direction immediately.
Chuck, can you comment a little bit? Tell us how long have you been committed to these goals?
Well, we actually got involved with the circular economy probably a decade ago, I think, and so we've been offering, we sell hardware and networking equipment that runs the internet, right? But our customers, when they take things out of service, we've been offering services for years where we'll actually pay to have that sent back to us, where we'll either recycle it or reuse it. We're now working on lots of efforts around reducing plastics in our packaging, redesigning our products for more efficiency. Ironically, you can write software in a way that makes your hardware platforms more efficient and use less power. And we've also designed our own silicon, semiconductors. Everybody's heard of semiconductors lately, right? Supply chain and semiconductors, things people didn't know about until the last year. We design our own semiconductors that actually in big data centers are taking the power consumption down for the cloud players down by 70 to 80%. So there's a lot of work that can be done, and I think over the next couple of decades we'll figure out how we get to the ultimate goal. But there's so much that every company today can do because we just haven't. I mean, most companies. I have to give my team a lot of credit. They have led in pursuing activities around trying to ensure that we're contributing to defending our planet for a long time. But I think now there's even more opportunity for us to do so, and I think we have more aggressive goals across the entire company.
So there's been a whirlwind of stepping up around Ukraine at the border, and certainly the type of impact that companies have had during the pandemic, Hugh, were very focused. Have you seen that change with the war in Ukraine? What more is needed to help Global Citizen get toward its goals and to inspire the private sector to maybe broaden out a little bit?
I think that the essence of what's needed at this juncture is the renewal of urgent political will. And what I mean by that is that I think you've seen, and I think we should all take a lesson from the last 2 years, maybe even 3. You saw how, even under Trump, his tenacity created, whether you like it or hate it, a political movement, right? And I'm not talking about your point of view, I'm just sharing the observation, right? In this context, what I think we also see is that immediately response to a pandemic, the world mobilized $17 trillion in economic resource. And they were right to do so because they staved off what could have otherwise been a catastrophic economic meltdown. But there was enormous political will when it was necessary, right?
Right.
And similarly, right now in the war in Ukraine, enormous political will, immediate mobilization of resource. I actually think if we can encourage political and business leaders, and by the way, ourselves as citizens, to take the long view on the greatest challenges we face right now, because I guarantee you the cost of inaction on climate change or on extreme poverty is far greater than the war in Ukraine or COVID-19, which is a single disease, because you're talking about all global health, every communicable disease at stake, right? So if we had that same degree of urgency, we would address the world's greatest challenges. Because if you add up all of the world's foreign aid, that is the entire foreign aid budget of every wealthy nation combined, we would have to spend that foreign aid budget again and again and again and again for 100 years just to match that pandemic relief spend. That's $17 trillion figure. We can mobilize political will. We just need to frame the issues, the most urgent issues, whether it's climate change or extreme poverty, with that same degree of political urgency and create the space for society to go on that journey and address these issues head on. That's my view.
So equality is another solution to the world's problems, and globally there is a long way to go. I recently, through my Know Your Value platform, partnered with Forbes to start the 50 over 50 list, recognizing women over 50 who are reaching their greatest impact in their 60s, 70s, 80s, 90s. And it was such a success that we started the US list and then did a 50 over 50 Asia, and then immediately did 50 over 50 Europe, Middle East, and Africa. And now there is a summit every year on and around International Women's Day in Abu Dhabi. And what I discovered in this partnership and working so hard on discovering these women and shining a light on them is that there are so many of them. It is incredible. Something has happened. We have arrived in a big way, and we're not going anywhere. So my question to you, Madam President, is did you ever, I mean, very honestly, and the answer might have been yes, but I've gotten a lot of no's to this question. Did you ever imagine, because I asked every woman on every one of these lists, did you ever imagine having your greatest impact at 63, in your 60s? And what is your advice to young women starting out?
So, of course, I did never imagine that. But what I always had were dreams.
I love it.
And if I see many, many young people in this audience. That's wonderful. Of course, there are a few over 60 like me, I guess, but not so many. So I had dreams. And if I can give you one advice from my experience, it is never, ever let anybody make you a bad conscience about what you're doing. Never, ever. Stick to your dreams. Go for it. Because only then it is possible to see that you're going much wider than you ever dreamt to be able to do that. And what the over 50s or 60 years old are concerned, there is a very nice saying in Germany that says, well, the young ones are running faster, but the older ones knows the shortcut. So
I love it. I will add a few more pieces of advice. And this is what I didn't know when I was starting out. I don't know what it was like for you, but I always felt I was in a rush. And what I learned with this incredible partnership with Forbes, learning about these incredible women like the president of the European Commission, is that you have a long runway for your life and your career. So slow down. Slow down. I'm actually telling my...
But stay ambitious.
Stay ambitious. Oh, I never said lose your ambition. But slow down a little bit, because you make fewer mistakes if you're not rushing, hyperventilating, trying to figure out how to squeeze it all into 30 years. You have a lot more time than that, okay? To pivot, to reset, to have life interrupt your work and work interrupt your life. And secondly, and most importantly about your confidence, nobody knows what they're doing, okay? Especially men. They have no idea. No, listen. You'll be with me on this. They don't remember anything. They don't remember. So they're always pressing reset.
Who are you again?
I'm Mika Brzezinski. Nice to meet you. Chuck, yeah, exactly. But the thing is, that makes them talented because they don't remember bad moments. They don't remember bad meetings. They don't remember getting fired. They don't care. In fact, if they got fired from a place, they're going to burn it down, right? And they don't remember, and we hold all that negativity and think like we should live and feed on it. So nobody knows what they're doing, especially the guys, and that's what makes them so successful. So it's a good, I mean, once I realized that, I was like, oh, I'm pretty good at what I do then. Okay. So Hugh, I want to want to bring a guest up, but before we do, call to action. Now that I've insulted you, please tell the world what you need.
He forgot.
Oh my goodness, that was awesome. I think give Mika a round of applause to begin with. Come on. You are awesome, Mika. Well, I think here in the room, everyone is here because you're global citizens, right? You share that common belief that something that happens to someone on the other side of the planet affects you. And that's why you care. And you see the interconnectedness of people. And so my final call to action is never allow the injustices of the world to become anything less than urgent, because for those people who are working every day just to survive, it is the urgency of their entire life. And so my ask for all of you is fight for it like if it was your own life. Fight for these issues like it was actually your life at stake, not someone else's life, not someone abstract on the other side of the world, but your life. Because if you were fighting for your life, damn, you would fight so hard. So fight with that degree of urgency as we work to fight these injustices over the coming years so that we actually can see an end of extreme poverty within our lifetime.
Hugh, thank you very much. And we have, yes, definitely. We have in the audience today the Ukraine ambassador to the UN, Ambassador Kislitsa. And if we could bring him a microphone, please. You'll remember he so eloquently confronted the Russian ambassador at the UN in the early days of the invasion. And I'm wondering, Mr. Ambassador, if you could please stand up and share your thoughts with us on the urgency of now.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. I have a prepared speech, but I put it aside because when I see Mika Brzezinski and her Ukrainian-themed flag, I should start with a very famous quote from Zbigniew Brzezinski, who said, and you can quote it better than I do, he said, without Ukraine, Russia ceases to be an empire. With Ukraine subordinated, Russia is an empire. It is very unfortunate that in the 21st century, there are still people, there is still a leader, or the leader rather, who believes that empires can be rebuilt and reestablished. It will never happen, and it will never happen because of the global citizenship of all of you and because of the global effort to help Ukraine to fight the evil. And I would like to thank Madam President von der Leyen and yourself, the entire European community of nations for helping Ukraine and standing by Ukraine. I would like to thank Hugh for his team doing an excellent job to help Ukraine. Ukraine fights for its life. Every citizen fights for its life. It's what Hugh has called all of us to fight for our life. But we also fight for the life of all of you. And we have to acknowledge that this fight is a long-haul operation. It's not going to be resolved the day after tomorrow, not even this year. Even if Russia is militarily defeated in Ukraine, it is still not the end of it, because the world will be safe when democracy and the rule of law is back in Russia. And how to make it back in Russia, nobody knows the answer. Nobody knows the answer. We have discussed this in many venues, including this morning. Nobody knows the answer, because it is up to the Russians to take their destiny in their hands and to bring democracy back in their country. So once again, I would like to thank the global citizens, Hugh and his team. I would like to thank President von der Leyen for the campaign that allowed to get so much money to help Ukrainians and to help yourself, all of you. I would like to thank the US Congress and the US government for the decision this week to provide $40 billion to the Ukrainians and to the Americans, in fact, because part of the money is going to be used here in the United States. Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Mika, for the wonderful family, for Zbigniew, for Mark, for me, and for yourself. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. You know, my family has not only a close connection with Poland, but also with Ukraine. My brother Ian, who you just mentioned, lived in Kyiv for a couple of years, helping the country back in 1993 establish defense policy. We did a family vacation in Ukraine, in the Carpathian Mountains. It is beautiful, and we stand with Ukraine. Thank you very much. Madam President, thank you. Chuck Robbins, thank you. Hugh Evans, thank you very much.